Welcome back to Cheddar Shakers. Well, the following segment is brought to you by Microsoft Advertising. Create smarter customer journeys in the era of customer-centric marketing.
Microsoft Advertising released a report just last week that details how consumer behavior is influenced by 5 categories, including culture, marketing, media, technology, and economics. Joining us now to discuss is Geoffrey and Kikimova, head of brand studio at Microsoft Advertising. Thank you so much for joining us here today.
Hi, thank you guys.
Absolutely. Jeff, we're going to go to you first. What is it about how these categories intersect that allows them to have such a profound impact on consumer behavior?
Yeah, thanks for having me, Kristen and Brad. Always good to see you. We wanted to look at just business strategy and the pattern recognition that makes it essential. And we looked at 5 areas that have really influenced business strategy for probably the last 100 years. And then if we go back a really long time, it's been influencing, how people behave with one another for a really long time. And I just really looked at this from an anthropological viewpoint on how businesses look at these areas and then how they apply that to their long-term business strategy. And that's pretty much why we put the report together. We found it pretty fascinating how there's more of this conjoint effect, this intersection, this remixing of all these categories that are influencing businesses.
So Aya, let's get you to weigh in here. Over the past decade, what are some of the most influential trends that impacted consumer behavior?
Sure. So there are 2 trends that really come to mind. The first one we identified was culture, we are media. And in that sense, we truly became media consumers and media creators. And you could think about the YouTube celebrities, you could become Insta famous. And also with the adoption of mobile all around the world, in fact, there are more mobile devices now than there are human beings on this planet. And the platforms really rising, like Facebook just exploding. It's no surprise that media became a huge consumption point for a lot of people. And in fact, we have consumed media more than ever before that we know of. And with that also, this became, our identity became so intertwined with media that we have started leaving such a huge digital footprint. You wake up in the morning, you post a Facebook blog, your status, and you update it all the way. So now we have had all this big data on the platform. And the second one was really AI and interconnectivity with the automation. So with automation, we had to deal with all this big data.
Wow.
So those 2, I feel like, were the biggest impact last decade.
And so, Jeff, according to the report, 59% of respondents said they saw trustworthiness as the most valuable characteristic in a brand. However, 44% said they used ad blockers on their personal computers or laptops. So how does this new reality affect brands?
Yeah, it's a difficult one if you think about it, because people really want to trust the brands that they do business with, pretty much like how we want to trust people we do business with. I mean, I think at the end of the day, brands are made up of people. We want to know that we trust the people we're doing business with. At the same time, we're blocking out a lot of those messages. So it leaves brands in an interesting space, and we identified this trend in our culture area called private trust. And what it basically is going to require is companies breaking through again by really creating more human-centric design. So how do they go beyond, the things that they've done the last decade, which was more around automation, more around, hey, we have your information, we can target you, we can hyper-target you. Now it's really more about, hey, we don't want to bombard you with a ton of messages that sound automated. We really want to know who you are. And that way, people sort of break down that barrier and brands can actually communicate with people moving forward. I think there's going to be a lot of turbulence this upcoming decade before some brands really break through, and people unblock advertising again.
So personalization, we know, was a key trend last decade. How is this trend going to manifest here in the new decade?
Sure, yeah. So last decade, we talked a lot about automation, and that was our very first step into personalization. Now, we believe that last decade, this is just the beginning. We're just kind of tipping the iceberg right now. And in the new decade, we're going to see really the depth of personalization and how we can not only advertise and market to one to few, but also to one-to-one. It will become a very personal relationship with the consumers and the brands who are able to mine the data that they've been able to collect over the last decade and to personalize it and to make sure that they deliver not only what the customers need, what they want, but also what they may want in the future, what they may not know that they need right now. Are those the brands that are going to win in the new decade? So from the personalization manifestation standpoint, I see a lot of the custom-made things, so custom-made clothing, custom-made cars. I think that's where we're going to see a lot of the trend picking up.
And so you started to really touch on this, Jeff, and then Aya as well. What are some of the lessons that we've learned from the 2010s that might influence the 2020s in terms of a decade's perspective?
Yeah, in terms of like one area, economics, we identified through history, the 2010s was basically about growth at all costs. And what we are looking for in the 2020s is really more of a zebras eat unicorns philosophy. That's actually the trend we identified. And this is where a lot of businesses who may have been left out of the venture capital model go it alone. They basically say, like, we don't really need venture capital. We're going to build sustainable business models that may not lead to $1 billion return on investments, but they last for a long period of time. That's one area that I think, really was missing the last decade. And I think we're going to see a turn toward more of this sustainability factor. How do you build a long-term business over the next decade? And this is no different than the turn of the century, Brad and Kristen. If we look at the, 1920s, my great-grandparents built sustainable small businesses. That was all through slow growth. And it usually came from niche groups of people that basically have been left out of the game the past decade. Women, people of color. So it's going to be very interesting, I think, in the 2020s moving forward. The better business ideas are not going to come from, basically the, people who have dominated that landscape in the 2010s.
All right, Geoffrey Colon and Aya Kikimova, head of Brand Studio and Brand Studio at Microsoft Advertising. Thank you both for taking the time here today.
Thank you so much.